It's about making your fund thesis unique and being able to stand out when you contact the LPs. Because a lot of what we've seen, maybe 2 years ago, you could have the broadest fund thesis, which is kind of like, oh, I'm going to deal with a hot topic like fintech or crypto, etc., which is no longer possible given everything that happened in crypto the past few weeks. If you can just figure out this is the fund thesis and make it very succinct, then from there, it's just a matter of meeting the right people who have that sustainability mandate and tell them, hey, listen, this is what I'm doing, and because of my background, I am uniquely qualified to go up against this.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant, and I'll be your host for the VC10X Podcast, and today we have Muieen Cader with us. Muieen has been writing on the topic of LP-GP fundraising and is a top writer on Medium for his articles. He has worked with various emerging managers globally, helping them in various aspects. In this episode, we talk about the mega LP list that Muieen has compiled, how GPs should approach LPs, how LPs evaluate the funds they want to invest in or not, DEI on the allocator side, and a lot more. This episode is filled with insight if you're a GP and want to raise a fund. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. Oh wait, if you haven't subscribed to VC10X yet, please do and give us a 5-star rating if you find value in this episode. Now, let's start. Hey Muieen, so good to have you on the VC10X Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm doing great as well, and great to have you on the podcast. So to start things off, can we have your story to have a little background and how you got into the VC landscape?
Sure. So it started off with an internship at Betatron, which was the #1 accelerator in Hong Kong at the time. During 2020, while I was finishing up my MBA at Nanyang Technological University. Then after that, I graduated and I started to write articles about what you need to know as an emerging manager, whether it's talking about how other funds have raised their fundraising through their pitch decks, or going through and saying these are all the resources that invest specifically in someone of such and such background as an emerging manager / as an LP. So that's how I started.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And more recently, you have been working on this mega LP list to kind of like make it easy for GPs to get in touch with the right kind of LPs who are actually actively investing. So tell us a little more about that how can GPs benefit from this list that you're building, and how is it different from the lists that are being circulated around?
Sure. So a little over a year ago, I had published a list of all the different LPs who publicly promote that they invest into emerging managers. What ended up happening is that it inspired a lot of other people to write via Command-C, Command-V, copy-paste. Oh, hey, now everyone seems to have a new article, pretty much referring to a lot of the same things I put. And then through that, a lot of people actually started to spam these LPs. So now you have LPs who previously used to openly promote that they invest into emerging managers. They will no longer do that sort of stuff. And the whole issue came from this kind of weird relationship where if you keep everything open, then everyone is going to try to just spam it to death. And then someone doesn't like to get spammed because no one likes getting spammed, right? It's irrelevant, it wastes time, all that stuff. So they decide, okay, I'm just going to cut it off, which then makes everything worse for the entire ecosystem. That is the start as to why we're doing the approach we're doing and why we're doing what we are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like your list is closed. I get that. So you need to pay something to get access to it, and you need to be serious about raising a fund. Only then you get access. That's one thing. So, yeah.
Exactly, and we also prevent people from trying to scrape the list or anything like that. And just to make everything easier, we also give pertinent details about the LP so that people understand how to write the email and how to structure the email. That way it's more than just kind of like, hey, I am a person trying to raise a VC fund. Give me money. Let's get this done. That doesn't work.
Yeah, I get it. And so the LPs are pretty protected. So this time they are not going to get spammed. It's very protected, and only the serious ones will reach them. And the other aspect is on the GP side. So how do they know that these are actually relevant LPs who are actually investing and they would be considering their pitch? Because these days you just keep emailing LPs and they don't get back to you. So you don't really know if they're actually seeing your emails or if they're actually active or not. So is that like you are doing that vetting that, okay, these are real LPs? And if you're doing that, then how are you doing that?
Sure. So I have personally mapped out the careers of a number of people in the allocator space. A lot of people who were in the allocator space 10 years ago are very likely either A, still in the allocator space, B, retired, or C, unfortunately, they've passed away. For the issue of C, we generally remove that information because we don't want people kind of reaching out to that person or that family and reminding them about something bad that happened, right? For B, if they're retired, then we'd still kind of write it out as this is a person who's retired. They might be able to help you connect with other people who are relevant in the ecosystem and act as a super connector for you / maybe an advisor, depending on how you want to position that relationship and under what context you want to reach out to them. For A, if someone has been in the allocator space 10 years ago, they're very unlikely to have pivoted into something different. The biggest difference in their career that will have happened is if their company had been acquired or if they've moved on to a different allocator. And so generally that's much easier to deal with and to help us make sure that everyone is relevant. In terms of specifically, can I guarantee that everyone is going to allocate? I can't do that because I don't manage these guys' money. So because of that, there's no way for me to control that unless I start to internally work for everyone there. And we have about 2,000 LPs at this point. So it'll be impossible to do anything like that.
Right. Yeah, no one can guarantee like you are going to get the investment or allocation that you want. But yeah, it's a legit list. That's for sure, right? And talking about the VC landscape, and since like we're seeing a slowdown right now, so the allocation activity is kind of not as active. So do you think this is a good time to be raising a fund? And are LPs actually interested still or not?
It's about making your fund thesis unique and being able to stand out when you contact the LPs. Because a lot of what we've seen, maybe 2 years ago, you could have the broadest LP, you could have the broadest fund thesis, which is kind of like, oh, I'm going to deal with a hot topic like fintech or crypto, etc., which is no longer possible given everything that happened in crypto the past few weeks, right, with SBF FTX. So now it's more about, okay, fine. Given my background, this is what I should be focused on, right? So, for example, there's a GP that we talked to a few weeks ago. And with them, they come from a very specific background of they were personally affected by Hurricane Katrina, plus they've come from a background where they're more likely to get hit by all of these climate issues. So for them, it makes a lot of sense that they focus on sustainability with a focus on marginalized communities because there's a lot of money there and these guys are ex-government. So they understand how things work and they understand how the government contracting business works as well. And these guys were trying to figure out how to do a fintech fund. So I kind of had to talk to them and tell them, like, no, you have an amazing background right now. Given that I've personally looked through all of these different family offices' websites, I can tell you that sustainability is a big play. And so if you can just figure out this is the fund thesis and make it very succinct, then from there, it's just a matter of meeting the right people who have that sustainability mandate and tell them, hey, listen, this is what I'm doing. And because of my background, I am uniquely qualified to go up against this and to help startups in this space make the world a better place.
Right. Absolutely. So those are like two problems that GPs usually face. One is like positioning themselves in the right way and like proving their credibility that they are the right one to do this. And the other one is obviously finding the right LPs and reaching out to them in a way that is actually good for the LPs and that actually commands some interest. And besides, what are some other problems that like emerging managers who are looking to raise their funds can potentially face while going through the entire process?
So it comes down to pre-qualifying and triaging. And that pre-qualifying of the LPs, we try to do to a certain extent, but there's only so far we can go. In terms of building that relationship with the LP from there, it's kind of like dating, where you kind of have your first meeting, which is, hey, just a quick 5-minute meeting. This is what I'm working on. Is it relevant to you or not? Yeah, it's relevant. Okay, cool. I seem to like you. You seem to like me. Let's do a second meeting, right? And from there, that second meeting is one where they can show the pitch deck and they can say, okay, this is why we're more interested than originally. These are the deals we're walking through, and this is where I would really like you guys to work with us. And then from there, the LP will say, okay, it's time to go into due diligence, or it's not yet time to go into due diligence. Again, this all depends on the LP and what type of LP you're dealing with, because there's two branches of the LP's world. You have the more unsophisticated LPs, who I'd say are closer to high net worth individuals, and then you have very sophisticated institutional grade investors, right? Where when they do due diligence, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at your fund and they're going to look for every other fund that has any overlapping thesis from yours. So for example, if you are a fintech fund, then they're going to find every fintech fund there is, and then they're going to ask themselves the questions, okay, is this fund better than these guys or not? And should I just invest my cash into these guys? So, and then you'll have the high net worth individuals where it's much easier to deal with, because for them it's like, oh, okay, I know you personally, what you're doing seems to be cool, really nice startups. I don't mind investing in you guys because you can do something I just don't have the time to do. So it's that world that they need to understand how to dance around and how to deal with that process depending on who they're talking to.
Right, absolutely. And like you just mentioned, like there's an entire spectrum of LPs as well. There are different kinds of LPs, right? And so broadly speaking, like who are the ones which are more likely to take higher risk, or maybe emerging managers, and then there'd be some LPs who are just investing in only the reputable firms out there who have already proven track record. So what are the kind of LPs that maybe the first time managers can target?
So a lot of it comes down to how you spin the story more than anything else. Plus, if it's more institutional grade, then making sure that they have an emerging manager mandate and that you fit into that emerging manager mandate. For example, some fund of funds, they do have an emerging manager mandate, but they will only invest into US-based funds. So you just have to make sure that, one, the mandate works, and then from there, it's about really getting your story right and getting your story to fit what your LP is thinking. So for example, we'll use corporations. With them, it's a matter of reaching out and figuring out, okay, what are the startups that might disrupt this company's industry in the future? And will this company want exposure to these startups earlier than when they become a unicorn company in the end? So for the GP, it becomes easier to kind of reach out to the corporates saying, okay, listen, I come from this background with so-and-so industry. This is what I think is going to be relevant. And these are the type of startups I've already invested in that can help you out today. And so from that perspective, the corporations can see, okay, there's benefit here from us, and we realize the value based off of these startups that you've already showed us.
Right. And now talking about fund sizes. So like LPs have their own preferences that we are going to allocate at least $10 million in a fund, and we are going to do it in 10 funds or maybe 5 funds. And some LPs want to go smaller. They'll be like, okay, we'll invest 1 to 2 million. And then there's also a thing like they'll also think about that we do not want to be like the majority of a fund. We do not want to lead the fund. So it has to be at least maybe $20 million fund. Then maybe we can put in a 5 million in that fund. But if it's maybe a 10 million fund, then they would not probably put a $5 million in that fund because they do not want 50% ownership of fund. So how is that relevant, and what can GPs look for to evaluate if it actually fits the LP's thesis of where and how much they want to invest?
So with respect to that, a lot of it comes down to pre-qualification. As you know, with the way public markets have been currently, the denominator effect has kind of taken place. So for example, if someone knows that, okay, my allocation to private equity has been traditionally about 8 to 13%, and now because public equities have significantly dropped down in price, I'm over-allocated to private equity. I might have to reduce that. I won't be able to know these guys' portfolios to that extent to say, okay, this is relevant or irrelevant. At the end of the day, you can only focus on building the relationship with the LP and making sure that, okay, these guys can allocate the money later on, even if they're not ready yet. Or B, they might be able to introduce me to a better fit as well.
Right, absolutely. And there's one aspect that I wanted to touch upon, that is diversity and inclusion in the venture landscape. And I think you've done some research on that front. So what do you think, how are we doing as the venture industry in terms of diversity and inclusion, and more in terms of maybe the LP landscape? Are we seeing diversification on that front as well? Because we are seeing some emerging managers coming from underrepresented backgrounds, but actually it all comes down to, are LPs willing to invest in those funds or not? Is there like that focus on diversity and inclusion on that front?
Sure. So I think part of us driving the LP relationship is driving either returns, or they might be interested in some sort of social cause if the fund has a social cause, right? But ultimately for DEI, it gets very nuanced and very difficult very quickly, because you've had some funds who started off with a very strong DEI focus and DEI mandate, and they've performed very poorly, especially some of the startups that they've invested in. So for example, there was one startup that they had invested into where the founder was taking about over $100,000 in total compensation, a salary of, I think, $90,000, plus a housing stipend of an additional $5,000. This is pre any sales on their audited financial statements. And these guys managed to get 3 rounds of crowdfunding because they had one of the best names in DEI VC on their cap table. Of course, having something like that out there really prevents other DEI managers from doing well. And so there's actually been research done by INSEAD that showed for women founders, if they are to get a funding from women VCs, then they're less likely to get funding in later rounds. So of course, there's a lot of issues with respect to DEI and making sure that DEI becomes a sustainable strategy versus a gimmick. Part of this comes down to being able to teach these people from these minority groups how to deal source, and also how to screen startups and make the recommendations for the startups to make them into success. That way, it's not just going to be, oh, hey, here's this startup that doesn't have any sales, where this founder is paying themselves a salary of $100,000 plus in total compensation, because that doesn't make sense, and it hurts the credibility of other people who might come from these strong backgrounds, who can figure out this is how we can make things better. And if you look at a lot of the kind of older people in this ecosystem, a lot of them don't want to stay involved and help to promote this next generation, because they're having issues kind of with coachability and making sure that doesn't come off as a gimmick. I'd really like to help these groups in terms of becoming better, and I've done this through my writing when I publish. These are the resources if you're a female founder, if you're a female GP, if you're coming from the IPOC background, and these are all the LPs that you can reach out to. That's where I start, and then from there it's just about making sure that these guys can understand what to do from a quality standpoint in order to secure those meetings, in order to get funding. And this is so important, but a lot of people don't pay enough attention to it. Because even on my Twitter, for example, I will get cold outreach from various GPs who are saying like, oh, hey, can you just make an introduction to so-and-so? They don't even say who that person is, and they don't give me any context about who this person is, what their fund is, no information about this person. They just slide into my DMs. Hey, I want an introduction to so-and-so. Can you give it to me? Versus I've also met journalists in the VC ecosystem, and this person is a fantastic female journalist, right? So for her, I want to see her career blossom, and her publication was recently shut down. So with her, I connected her to all the super old people in the VC landscape who have been there for like 30, 40 years. They can probably get her hired in any position like that. So now instead of her being in that awkward spot of how do I get involved into the VC space as a woman, she has very strong mentors who will be able to coach her through her career and her career next steps, and she's able to stay in the VC ecosystem. And this is the type of stuff where I think us as an ecosystem in the DEI space have to get more involved with.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's an important aspect. And you mentioned about the bad actors, that there are some firms that are not probably investing in the right way, and that basically hampers the entire DEI spectrum. But like it can be said, like even the best of the VCs, right, actually are making some really big mistakes out there in the industry. And like we have seen some recent events as well, where some big firms were involved in these like firms, and you're like wondering how can they invest in this company. So like everyone is making their own share of mistakes, but like I think what we need to battle more is like this stereotyping that, okay, if a woman was a previous investor, then I'm not going to come in, and the data that it shows, right? And maybe it's from an underrepresented background, then it's not taken that seriously. So I think this stereotyping needs to go away, and you need to have your own diligence process that is same across the board. Like doesn't matter who were the previous investors and who's on board on the cap table, right? So what's your view on that?
And then I'd add one more point to that, which is on the allocator side, right? Because I've looked at all of these different family offices. I've looked at all of their staff, employees when I can. There are so few family offices who seem to hire people of color or anything like that. Like, I think I've looked at maybe 100 different family offices teams. I've only noticed one woman of color the entire time. Right? So of course we have to work on the allocator side. And I know that a lot of people talk about how we need more color on the VC side. We also need more color on the allocator side. And we need to get more young students involved in the allocator space. There are a number of organizations like New American Alliance, I hope I got their name right, who host events to try to get young students who are in their college years to get exposure to these allocators and get them careers into that. Because if we can get more people of color in the allocator space, then that makes everything significantly easier for everyone. And it's just a matter of making sure that these roles get exposure and these companies get more exposure to minority talent or underrepresented talent, right? Of course, a lot of these companies, to be fair, a lot of these companies have maybe like 5 people max on their staff. So it's just, I understand where they're coming from as well. And we just have to play to both sides.
Right, absolutely. And since we have seen that it's hard to get into the VC space as well, which is basically taking money from others and then investing. And VC teams are also pretty small, right? So it's hard to get in. And talking about the allocator side, I believe it's more or less the same, or maybe even smaller teams. So do you think that allocators actually take in young folks to actually start working with them, maybe college grads right out of college, something like that? Or what do they really look for in people before they take in? Do they actually look for prior investor experience or something like that, or maybe an MBA degree or something like that? Or how does that look like?
So for a lot of family offices, you'll see that they generally hire an attorney to head up all of the investment, and they'll be in charge of the family office, if you will. Then after that, more on the wealth manager side, you also have these financial advisors. And for them, it's just about you're coming from a network, you're a wealth manager, so you're able to build out the network of clients who trust you to kind of handle their money well and appropriately. And for that, I think we also need to work on that. One of the main reasons why we won't be able to necessarily solve that problem right now is because of more societal basis, right? Because people are more likely to work with a wealth. People are most likely to work with a wealth manager who might come with the same background to that person, right? And you might have to rely more on personal network to get into those environments. So I understand how nuanced it is, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done from both a societal level as well as from a professional level, from the family offices themselves and how to get in touch with family offices. As long as it's kind of easy to know who you are, family offices are willing to work with people, right? I've reached out to cold outreach family offices that I've probably met with, I would say, at least a couple dozen family offices at this point. All the relationship building and meeting with them has been relatively simple because I have my blog that I can rely on. Everyone can refer back to my blog. It's quite simple to know who this person is, who Muieen is, what is he about, right? And through that, people generally know, okay, I want to meet with this person. It might be interesting. It's just 15 minutes, get to know them. And from there, they're like, actually, we're working on this. This is what we're considering doing. Hey, it might be interesting for us to connect. Okay, sure, let's connect. Let's take things further. From a student perspective, understand who those family offices might be a bit trickier. But once you get a hold of them, I think it's much easier to kind of develop that relationship.
Right. And is a career on the allocator side, on the LP side, as lucrative as a career in the venture side? If you have any insight on that.
It depends on the size of the family office as well as what you are doing for that family office. Because for the family offices, they'll try to be competitive with the rates of industry. That way they can get the best talent. Of course, a lot of it also depends on who the manager is and what the management style of the person is. So it's tougher to kind of make any sort of broad statements because everything is so nuanced, and you have like 100 of, actually closer to 1,000 plus of all these small firms. Maybe max size is going to be 20 people in their staff. So there's a lot of things to figure out, and I don't have a clear solution for that right now.
Got it. No worries. And coming back to the mega LP list, so what all info can a GP who gets into the list can get access to? So they get access to the family office name, emails, what else is there to make them pre-qualify to a certain level?
Sure. So for the entire list, I went through everything on Google, Yandex, Bing, etc. that's related to the family office. I only use their emails if they're publicly available, meaning you can easily search their email into Google and it pops up. So that way everything is GDPR compliant. I also add a small little blurb about the LP or family office. That way you know how to write the email to the family office, and it's not just, hey, I want money. You have X million or billion or trillions of dollars AUM. Give me some of that money. But it's more kind of like, hey, listen, I noticed from reading on your website or wherever that you do so and so and so. This is what I'm thinking about starting, or this is what I'm in the middle of starting, and I'd love to meet with you for a quick 15 minutes just to go over where I am, figure out if this is a good fit or not, right? You're more likely to get responses that way than the traditional way of, hey, listen, I want money, I'm looking for money, you have money, give me money, right? That's panhandler technique, not a very good technique for something as bespoke as venture capital.
Right, absolutely. And is the list already out, or is it going to be out soon? And where can GPs get access?
Sure. So the list is out. We limit the amount of users to 10 per month. It's an annual subscription. You can check it on megalplist.com. There's a hyphen between mega and LP and list. And so we're trying to make everything easier for everyone. And again, we're just trying to change that dynamic of, instead of making things easy to spam, to 100 plus LPs, and you kind of scratch your head and ask yourself, how come none of these guys are reaching out to me? It becomes something like, oh, hey, now I understand how to reach out to the person and what information to include in my opening message. plus if I'm relevant to them or not.
Great. So I'll make sure to put the link in the show notes below so that our audience can get there easily. GPs who are maybe interested in getting access to this pre-qualified list of LPs. And besides, what would be the best place for our listeners to follow you and read your blog?
Sure. So through my Twitter account or my Medium. Those are the two best ways to get in touch with me. LinkedIn I generally use for people I've already met or if there's a relevant connection.
Right. Those links will again be there in the show notes. And the blog post I'll go along with the episode. Thank you for coming on, Muieen, and wish you all the best with the Mega LP list. And I'm hoping that it's going to help a lot of GPs raise their funds.
Yes, thanks so much for having me, Prashant, and have a good rest of your day, okay?
All right. Pleasure hosting you. Bye-bye.